Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Seth Carpenter joins us right now, Global Head of Macro Research at Morgan Stanley as well. I think I've mentioned once this morning, Seth, that there's a Fed meeting. I think Ellen Biesenzetner and others would say, at Morgan Stanley, they're going to pause or this or that. But what's the Morgan Stanley nuance forward when you research our central bank?
Yeah, I think to be quite fair to the Fed, they're in an extraordinarily difficult situation. If you look at the aggregate spending numbers, those are coming in pretty solid. And then you look at the employment numbers and the non-farm payrolls numbers are coming in really, really soft. And that combination is pretty ahistoric. And so they have cut rates several times over the past, call it 6 months or so. They're trying to figure out how close are they to neutral. They're trying to figure out, is the soft labor market the signal or is it the noise? Is the strong spending the signal or is it the noise? And judging from the commentary across the committee, there is not a single view. When I worked at the Fed, as you know, Tom, I was there for 15 years. One of my bosses would say, the FOMC are 19 people that don't agree on the color of an orange. And right now, they've got every right to have a disagreement in terms of the outlook for the economy, given the noise. And so I think that's where they are. I think they will be pausing this week. I think Chair Powell will have a very difficult messaging job to do at the press conference, both because it's a tricky macroeconomic situation and because every single journalist is going to be asking him about the political side of things, which I suspect he will want to stay far away from.
So this is like when you roll at Princeton. Yeah. Did you see the pun he put in there about the color orange?
Yep, I know.
And some people would allude that to the President of the United States. You can't get through a meeting at Morgan Stanley without a Seth Carpenter allusion or pun.
Seth, we think about 2025 and the U.S. equity markets performed very, very well, but boy, a lot of the performance in the rest of the world was superior to that of the U.S. here. What's that U.S., non-U.S. outlook for 2026 in your mind?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. At Morgan Stanley broadly, we're still pretty bullish on the outlook in the U.S., but also globally. We think U.S. equities probably outperform. So my colleague Mike Wilson, who's our chief equity strategist, is really constructive. And he's pointed out that in times where we don't have a recession, where interest rates are looking like they're going to come down a little bit, you don't usually have too much in the way of multiple compression. And so even though a lot of people have commented on how stretched multiples are, the macro backdrop, if everything goes according to plan, seems like it's favorable. Moreover, part of what's looking stretched in the index overall is the top end, the hyperscalers especially. And so if we have a broadening of growth in the economy, then maybe the rest of the equity market gets to catch up a little bit. So in that regard, we're pretty constructive. Now, again, I said that's if everything goes according to plan. The assumption was that all of the uncertainty about tariffs were in the background, all of the uncertainty about geopolitical risk were going to start to fade. I think that question remains to be answered, judging from the news cycle over the past couple of weeks.
In the time we got left, Seth, we got to go to some breaking news here, given the storm and all. But Dr. Carpenter, your thoughts on what's percolating over the weekend, that it's less about the Japanese yen and it's more about gold at 5,100, the phrase dollar debasement, DXY and the Bloomberg dollar index coming down. Is it a new weak dollar trend? And what does that signal for the nation?
Yeah, so we have been actually here at Morgan Stanley pretty much consistently calling for the dollar to weaken over time coming into 2025. So we go back a year ago, we were the outliers saying the dollar was going to sell off. Everybody else was looking for a dollar rally with the prospect of tariffs and that sort of thing. And so, we were right first half of the year. We got about 10% or so depreciation in the dollar broadly. We were looking for a little bit more. It didn't come down quite as much as we thought. The U.S. economy held up just a little bit more. The Fed's cuts sort of pushed off just a little bit more. We do think there's some fundamental reasons, though, why you should see a little bit more in the way of dollar weakening. I think the yen cross is just one specific, special example. And the sharp moves that we saw at the end of last week were notable. But
right.
Overall, we do think there's room for continued correction.
Let's go nerdy. We've got Damian Sassauer with us later, but I do think, Seth, this is important to mention because I take great umbrage about it. I really disagreed with the allusions to the Plaza Accord this weekend. I just don't see the out of whack in 2026 that we saw 40 years ago in the Plaza Accord or the Louvre Accord. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I guess I'm sympathetic to your view. We think there's some very fundamental market-driven reasons for you to get a bit more depreciation in the dollar, sort of a persistent, consistent, coordinated move because there's a fundamental disconnect in the world sort of trading order. I think that's a little bit more open to interpretation.
So one of the things we're dealing with over the weekend, and certainly here in the early trading, is the U.S. dollar, the yen here. What's your thought here as we think about currencies here in this January morning?
Yeah, I mean, so we have thought, especially for the dollar yen cross, we have thought that on fundamentals, there was room for the yen to strengthen against the dollar. The sharp moves that we saw again at the end of last week were, a bit very, very striking, obviously, and they made headlines. Everyone paid attention to it. I think directionally, it makes sense to us exactly how we get from point A to point B. That's going to be the tricky part. I think the Bank of Japan, right, when they're looking at things, they've been more comfortable perhaps with gradual moves in the yen. So they haven't been raising interest rates aggressively to revalue the yen. In that regard, remember, after 25 years of essentially stagnant nominal GDP growth, they're building in this cycle of reflation. And so a softer yen at the margin can help them a little bit. But once it goes too far, especially if it were to move quickly, then it starts to have domestic repercussions in terms of imported food and energy. So I think the dollar yen is a very special case of the dollar situation more broadly.
Dr. Carpenter, thank you so much. Seth Carpenter, Global Head of Macro Research at Morgan Stanley. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Surveillance coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
One of the best photos in the history of the Republican Party is younger Bush, George Bush, with a kid who couldn't shave. I don't think Patrick McHenry, when he first was photographed with Bush, could shave twice a week. He has gone out to a sterling career, 20 years of public service, and he's still holding it, 49 years old. Joining us this morning, the former chair, House Financial Services, and all of his duties to the grand old party, Patrick McHenry. Congressman, good morning to you.
I've had no better introduction. Thank you.
Well, it's good to have you with us. How fractured is the GOP this morning, given the events of Minneapolis?
Quite. Look, this is Trump's stance on immigration was his greatest political strength. And given what has happened in Minneapolis in the last 2 weeks, it's become a weakness. And so there's great concern about the specifics, the loss of life in Minneapolis, the care and training that those ICE officers have for the population, and the overall tactic here. But let's step back. The concern in Congress is the implementation of the laws. Congress needs to step in and actually change the immigration laws. I think that's what the Trump administration is trying to draw out. And that's what we've seen in this shifting debate over the last 2 weeks, in fact.
I have the clearest memory of a real effort to change our immigration laws where Senator Kennedy and others all the Republicans went down in flames, I'm going to say a long 15, 20 years ago. Now, does the Senate block a rational immigration strategy because so many people, including in the Carolinas, say, we've got the power in the Senate, we're not changing?
In fact, yes, because both sides think that they have a political advantage on immigration, and therefore you haven't seen a compromise. It's a serious problem. The Congress over 20 years has attempted immigration reform 3 times in a major way. The last time was during the first Trump administration, and we had a bill, 2 bills, in fact, that almost made it out of the House. By very, very narrow margins, lost on the House floor. But that was the last go of it. In fact, we have a mess of an immigration policy. And the substance of our immigration policy is unpopular with the people. Enforcement is very popular with the people if broadly done and focused on the criminal element, the most egregious criminal element in our society. When you're picking up random people and having rough-ups with protesters, it becomes far less popular and far more questioned by the average voter.
I think what surprised some people is a lot of people don't care. I don't see the uproar coming out of Minneapolis here. Some people trying to equate it to Kent State. I don't sense that out there. Is there in the halls of Congress? Is there a sense that this is a significant issue?
The questioning of Congress is around the training of ICE officers and the tactic of going into specific localities for major enforcement action. The Congress, and I think Republicans broadly, and in fact Democrats, would like the focus to be on the criminal gang element and the border. Those things are very, very popular. But these dust-ups with average everyday citizens, that's the stuff that gets questioned across society.
Patrick McHenry with us with his public service to the grand old party. He's a contributor to Bloomberg. We're thrilled he could give us perspective here, given the uproar. I got 8 ways to go here. I'm going to always call you Congressman. And I got 8 ways to go, Congressman, in no time. So let me talk about this. You've very publicly, you've taken funds in different re-election bids from the National Rifle Association. We have a bedrock idea in this country of the right to bear arms. We have someone dead up in Minneapolis with or without a gun. I don't want to get into the debate, folks, but tell me how we juxtapose our colonial mythology with the idea of what we see in Minneapolis. What is the next step beyond in this emotion of the Second Amendment?
Oh, well, this is where the left has come out in defense of Second Amendment rights because the activist here was a liberal. And had an open carry, and Minnesota has an open carry law. And so, then we have some on the right saying, well, because he had a weapon, that was justification for the actions of the ICE officers. So both sides have flipped on when it comes to Second Amendment rights in this exact circumstance. And it tells you how polarizing Donald Trump is to the body politic. I don't mean polarizing. I mean, he has the most influence over every political discussion right now. And if Trump's on one side, then the Democratic Party must be on the other side. The left must hold strong, even if he agrees with them on certain issues. It's quite an atmosphere we have right now.
Congressman, we saw Minnesota CEOs, they're seeking de-escalation after the border police shooting. Is there a role here, a meaningful role for corporate America to play a role in some of these debates?
Well, over the last 10 years, when they've done this, it's been a huge mistake for them. They need to stay out of politics. What you saw with these Minnesota CEOs is they said, we need to de-escalate. They're not getting into the substance of it. They're just saying, we want calm in our city and we want peace in our city. That is a message not just to the president or to ICE or the Border Patrol, but to the mayor and the governor. That cooler heads need to prevail here. The governor's stance to say, well, actually, we just need ICE out of our state is an absurd one. We have to enforce federal immigration laws. But both sides should be actually able to come to the table and have a rule of law approach here that cools the populace and restores order.
Patrick McHenry, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg Surveillance. And this morning at 49 and holding, the youngest member of Congress, just a few years ago. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Surveillance coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Brian Belski finally with us here as the Chief Executive Officer and CIO, Humilis Investment Strategies. Brian, earnings just seem to be obscured, and I don't buy it for a minute. Does double-digit earnings mean buy the bid here on the market?
I think it is, Tom. Thank you so much for having us. I think the market is going to be having a hard time transitioning from this really momentum, multiple-driven upside that we've, for all intents and purposes, seen since the fourth quarter of 2022 when the current bull cycle started. Our work shows historically that earnings-driven markets are still positive, but they're not as positive as multiple-driven markets. I think that's why this week is such a huge week, because we see some of the biggest tech companies come out with earnings, number one. Number two, we've had tremendous performance and outperformance the last week or 2 weeks from the small mid-cap area, which we've been talking about for a couple of years. We were pretty early, but at the end of the day, we think a broadening out of the market to more small mid-caps is actually quite positive for the longer-term breadth and positive nature of the overall secular bull market that we continue to call for.
Paul, NASDAQ up 18% 1 year. S&P up 13% 1 year, Dow up 11% 1 year. I believe that's double-digit performance.
That's double-digit performance. Brian, Thomas is calling out some solid returns for U.S. equities, but and you think about 2025 and even the start here of 2026, rest of world, other markets have done a lot better outside the U.S. How do you think about the U.S. versus rest of world?
It's a great question, Paul. 2025 was a snapback year, principally because I think a lot of political side of things and the fear trade leaving the United States. Then you also had the currency weakening, and then you've had the currency strengthening in other areas. And we do think that the value proposition, certainly of Europe and some emerging markets, was an attractive play. And then you talk about our brethren in Canada, which how Canada had its greatest net outperformance on a local currency basis since 1990 relative to the U.S., mostly because of gold. But even though gold gets a lot of headlines, the banks in Canada really rocked it in 2025, especially considering the reserves that they had been, quite frankly, building over the last several years. So I think the Canada trade is going to be tougher this year. I think in terms of the other markets, I think it's going to be tougher. I think we're going to have a little bit more balanced across all markets, especially given the fact that now we need to see fundamental growth going forward for emerging markets and going forward for Europe. And it's not just going to be all about the materials and the energy side.
I look, Brian, at the makeup here. I want you to talk to people in their 401k, like me, that stumbled into decent returns over the last number of years. Should they reallocate? Should they rebalance? Or is it just static? Keep it the way it is. Patience forward.
Patience forward has always been our line. We're not the smartest person on this call right now, by the way, or on this broadcast. And
I know Michael Barr just entered the room.
Yeah, well, there you go. But at the end of the day, we have a report coming out today on our website under our new moniker called Belski Briefs, and we talk about the importance of remaining longer term invested. If you miss the best days in the market and you try to trade the market out since 1990, the average annual return is 8.6%. But when you miss the best days of the market, which typically, oh, by the way, follow the worst days in the market, your annual compound annual growth rate in terms of your portfolio is going to be 4.5%. So just it sounds mundane, but be invested. But what we think is you want to broaden out what you're owning, Tom, in your 401k. Let's call it more value, more small mid-cap, more dividend growth. Not at the expense of selling the Mag 7. We still think you need to have some exposure in tech, and we're equal weight tech in our work. But at the end of the day, you want to be invested U.S. stocks. Now is not the time to run away based on fear or rhetoric, and especially with respect to what's going on in terms of politics.
Brian, how about the bond market here? The 2-year Treasury is yielding 3.60 here. That's a nice living there for a lot of folks. But should we be taking some credit risk above and beyond that?
We think bonds still remain an important part of anyone's longer-term portfolio. I think the bond market has really been kind of a forgotten asset.
Right.
We're thinking and talking more about private equity. I like the bond market here, especially around this zone. And we've been talking now for the last 2 or 3 years that this 350 to 450 range, it's a wide range, but that is returning to more normalcy that we've seen in markets for the last 30 years. And I think that's where we're going. And within that range, Paul, I really think that's an area where we should own bonds.
Brian Belski with us with Humilis, and of course we've got a Segui here into the reality as well. Brian, I mean, there's no one we speak to who's more attuned to the ability of Sam Darnold to come over his shoulder and pop that puppy down 40 yards. I mean, you go back to when the Vikings lost him to Seattle. You go back to Seattle winning 26-0 against the Vikings this year. Brian Belski on Darnold and the Patriots.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going through the rosters here of the ex-Vikings in the Super Bowl, which is kind of, like, so you think about Stephon Diggs and the Patriots and Sam Darnold, who obviously in Minnesota Sports Radio, which we'll be listening to on this interweb thing, this www thing. It's going to be crazy in Minnesota Sports Radio today because, we're a bunch of masochists in Minnesota sports. So I'm sure that people are going to be mad that Seattle is in Super Bowl. I think it's amazing in what Sam Darnold's been able to do, and they played a great game yesterday.
They did. They moved down the field like nobody. Brian Belski, thank you so much. And I must really editorialize, folks. He has that great study, classic, Good Morning Capital Guardian Trust in Los Angeles. If you miss the 10 top days in the market, you don't get a trophy at the end of the day. Brian Belski, thank you so much with Humilis. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Surveillance coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Joining us now, we mentioned the wonderful snow removal above ground. There is beneath the ground as well, on the bus as well. Janno Lieber joins us now, MTA Chair and CEO here in New York City. Janno, I remember years ago in Boston, the snow, the salt, the slush drifted down and basically shut down the large system of Kenmore Square. Are you and your team worried about major breakdowns just because of the harshness of this, or is it just an emergency as usual?
Tom, it's an interesting point. Rob was talking about the advances in forecasting. The advantage of that is it allows us to do a ton of preparation, and 15,000 MTA workers labored over the weekend and into today to make sure we could put on service. And we were able to maintain bus and subway and Metro North and Long Island Railroad commuter service right through the storm, with delays, with imperfections, but we were able to operate, which is not always the case in the past. And that's because of preparation. Our concern now is we're operating a full Monday morning commute, which is amazing. But obviously with a risk of thaw and icing, that presents new problems. So we're moving on in how we manage the impacts of the storm, just as you suggest.
Janno, give us the status of the subway and the bus system as it is right now, and kind of how you think it might play out over the next 24 hours.
Well, here, the bottom line is we're operating service on all subway lines,
nice,
on all bus lines. There are some delays partly because we have crews that live in New Jersey and they're not able to get in because New Jersey Transit is out of business for today.
Whoa, shame there to New Jersey. A little bit of cross Hudson River shit.
No, but listen, everybody's different. We were able to survive this storm with as I said, 15,000 people doing a ton of work. But the bottom line is we're running every line. Metro North is running 550 trains today. Long Island Railroad running 750 trains. Both of them on kind of robust holiday schedules or weekend schedules. If you're listening, MTA commuter, check your train time app or your MTA website, mta.info, for specifics. But we're running service, and we're ready to keep that going as we go forward in the week.
Janno, persistent cold is in the forecast here. Heard from Rob Carolan, maybe for the week, maybe 2 weeks of well below average temperatures. How does that impact your system?
Yeah, listen, when your ice is the enemy of good service on rail, right? So you have to run your de-icing trains constantly, make sure that the switches don't actually freeze up. And we have maintainers literally standing by our major switches, our major interlockings to constantly de-ice. But we got all the snow by running service yesterday right through the system. We got the snow off of the third rail. We've been maximizing our use of diesel engines on the commuter rails, which don't depend on the third rail. And we're going to keep at it. So they're new challenges brought on by icing, especially for the bus system, which is 100% chained. All the wheels are chained. But we're going to keep managing through.
Can I ask one non-storm question?
Sure.
Yeah. What is so fascinating is you've been very vocal in your support of our new mayor. And you've also said that we need a lot of study of free buses. Give us an update on how close we are to free bus service of the MTA.
Today's really about the muscling through the storm, honestly,
sure.
Tom. But I'll just say this is that the new mayor, Mamdani, is very pro-transit, and I welcome that. I've also made clear that if we're going to talk about something as radical and as impactful as making a whole section of our system free, we need to do a ton of study, and it's not a flip the switch type thing. So I'm sure that the governor, who is leading with her State of the State message, making a lot of investments, but also mindful of we've brought the MTA back to financial stability under Hochul's leadership, and we don't want to mess with that. So we'll be moving methodically under Governor Hochul on addressing this idea.
Amid the storm, thank you for the conversation forward. Janno Lieber is with the MTA Chair and CEO as well.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday, 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.